welcome to Final Fights, brought to you by Movies, Films, and Flicks. I am Mark Hoffmeyer, and joining me is a man who is very excited to be talking about this fight. It's Tom Tresimer.
It is Robert Roy and MacGregor.
Last night you were texting me, and you're like, Mark, I have some amazing data for you. I'm like, save it for the pod. And you're like, no!
I didn't want to save it for the pod. I wanted to text about it right then and now. I was very excited about what I had unearthed back in the Highlands of Scotland.
So you went on a field trip. You actually went to all the filming locations. You recreated the famous fight scene. You and your wife kind of, went around and recreated every step.
We did. It was challenging figuring out the logistics, especially with what's going on in the world right now. But we somehow managed to get over there, and we recreated the fight. I, of course, was Robert MacGregor, and my wife was Archibald Cunningham.
Hey, so before we get into this excellent fight, beside this and Equilibrium, these were the two most requested fights when we started saying that we're going to start this Final Fights series. And I just have a quick question for you. If Tim Roth's Archibald Cunningham and Liam Neeson's Robert Roy MacGregor were animals, what would they be?
Oh, man.
Because the reason I ask is last night when I was watching it, I don't know why, but in all caps in my notes, I have Tim Roth is a puma. I don't know why. I just said he is so.
I could see that. I was thinking of some sort of cat. My mind's eye was drawing me to like a cheetah.
Yeah,
because he's not necessarily the biggest cat around, but he's very quick and agile, and he's very cat-like in his movement, in his fluidity, especially when he's fighting. He's graceful.
And then Rob Roy is what, a tank? He's a rhino.
He's literally just like a howitzer tank. He's not even an animal. Yeah, he's just a slow-moving tank.
A brick shithouse.
A rhino would work. I was going to say maybe like a big grizzly bear.
Oh, I like that better.
Deceptively fast, still very, very strong. He can just bulldoze you through.
You know what I liked about his characters? And we have a lot of stats and facts, and William Hobbs, of course, helped choreograph this. And the production design for the fight itself is unbelievable. And Tim Roth got an Oscar nomination for this role because he is excellent. And you know what? In the beginning, he was worried that he was too over the top. But then the director, Michael Caton Jones, was like, go more. Do it. Like, get more over the top. And I love that.
Yeah, Roth was scared that he allegedly started talking to his agent about finding other roles. He was afraid he was going to get fired.
But what makes it work, so his opening fight against, what is it, Guthrie?
Will Guthrie.
Yeah, so the opening fight against Guthrie, it showcases his sort of, you read this in a lot of reviews, it's kind of like English dandy. Very manicured, very dressed up, wearing his silks with his wig, doesn't even take off his wig during the fight. And it kind of showcases that he didn't take it seriously. And in the smiles, the cheekiness, all that. And
yeah, he's got this aristocratic, like, pompy attitude. Yeah. Like, he's he's even, like, beyond flamboyant, but braggadocious with his fights. Like, he lands a hit, and he sits there and smiles and kind of, slashes his sword through the air, and then gets ready for the next round, and that does. It all starts off there with poor Guthrie.
And so in this poor Guthrie, he had no chance. But in this final fight, I like that he went so far over the top in the beginning, but at the final fight, he takes off his wig. He isn't laughing. I mean, this whole fight scene is basically just people breathing. And I think it shows how seriously he's taking it. And I also liked how we were introduced to Rob Roy as a fighter. I mean, he's sneaky. He has his big sword, but he stabs a dude in the gut. He is not above... Not a cheap shot, but...
And that's kind of what's interesting is that I think Archie as the ladies call him, he likes to draw it out. Like, yeah. He wants to make his opponents suffer. Like, he wants that oncoming dread that they know that they're eventually going to be doomed and they have no control over it. Whereas Rob Roy he wants to end it right then and there. Like, he's not about, drawing it out. He doesn't want some slugfest. He's going to go straight for the gut and get it over with.
Now, the first time you watched this, so this came out in 95. I caught this on VHS probably in 96, which means I was 14. And I really enjoyed this film. I absolutely adored it. But at the end, when he grabs the rapier and just hacks him, not in half, I mean, from his shoulder probably down to his heart.
Nearly in half.
What was your reaction when you were young Tom, 12, 13, 14?
Well, like many of the movies that I watched that we review, I probably saw this first on Encore. Thank the heavens for Encore. But I remember watching it going, how is he going to get out of this? Like, he's not going to best him in straight up combat. So he's going to have to find some way to do it. And yeah, when he grabs that sword and locks it in his hand and then just hacks him in half, it's awesome. It's brutally awesome.
You know what I love too is William Hobbs. I mean, I know this was in the script, but what William Hobbs did and what the director did, I mean, Roger Ebert says this is one of the greatest fight scenes he's ever seen. He said it's one of the greatest sword fights ever filmed. And I was going through a bunch of lists, Tom. I don't know if you noticed this, but this isn't in many of the top 10 lists, which kind of blows my mind. Maybe because it's an obscure film that maybe people have forgotten about.
I think this is one of the greatest sword fights, if not the greatest, especially like heavy sword fight in cinema history. Yeah. But the movie itself isn't much of like a swashbuckling film. It's not like a Pirates of the Caribbean, where you've got sword fights going on every 15 minutes that last for 20 minutes.
On top of everything you can think about, splits on chariots and stuff like that.
Yeah. Other than Archie's fight with Will Guthrie at the beginning, this is the longest fight of the movie. Everything else is in like very short bursts.
Yeah.
Short, intense bursts of action and adventure.
You know what I love too? William Hobbs, man. He worked on The Duelists, which Ridley Scott, which I love. He worked on Ladyhawke, which we covered on the podcast. So Rutger Hauer has a fantastic sword fight at the end of that film. They built a set specifically for that sword fight. Then we have Robin Hood with Kevin Costner, Willow, which, I mean, Mad Mardigan in his sword fighting and that real big dude with the skull face. I mean, that's some great sword fighting. Count of Monte Cristo, which I'd love to cover with you eventually, between Guy Pearce and Jim Caviezel.
That's got a great sword fight.
I mean, Hobbs, so he was a champion fencer. So I think he understood how dangerous it was, and I think that shows in a lot of his films. I guess what I'm saying is, when I think back all these movies, they all have distinct sword fighting skills. And then this movie, I mean, that epitomizes that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, especially between the two rivals of this movie. Like, the contrast couldn't be wider than what it is in this movie.
You got a Puma versus a tank. So what are some of these stats that you wanted to tell me about last night?
Okay, so I sat down with an old-fashioned mechanical stopwatch, and I clocked this sword fight. And the whole entire scene, by the time that I don't know what you want to say, the official claps his hand to start the fight, to the end of it where Archibald finally falls to the ground, is roughly 4 minutes and 51 seconds.
Wow.
But there's a lot of downtime in there as well. I mean, you got to think about, like, it's almost like a chess match where these guys are squaring off against each other, trying to figure out who's going to make the move and how they're going to do it, how they're going to parry and respond and attack and such and so forth. And it's always these short, quick bursts of intense fighting. And I think that's really realistic, especially when you look at how fencing and sparring is. Like I watched a bunch of YouTube videos of that stuff last night. I was so intrigued by it. And it's all these very short, quick jabs, and then they break off, and then they do it again. It's not just an all-out brawl for 5 minutes to see who wins. And so I almost looked at this thing as like a boxing match. And so every time the action stopped, I would start a new round. And it ended up being roughly 13 rounds.
Oh, that's cool. And do you know who won each round? Do you have a count of each round?
I do. And again, this
awesome.
isn't... I am no sword fighting expert or fencer. I don't necessarily know the rules of fencing and how hits are marked, and I don't know all the terminology. So I based this off of, in my mind, who was making the attack or being the aggressor. And for those first almost 6 rounds, Archie dominated that fight. Like, he started off with a barrage. In the first round, went about 16 seconds, and he had 6 offensive attacks in that 16 seconds to Rob Roy's 0.
Wow.
Round 2 went 15 seconds. Archie had 2 attacks, Roy had 0, but Archie scored the first hit with a slash across the abdomen.
The backwards stab,
The backwards
right?
one.
Oh.
Segment 3 starts off 14 seconds. Archie has 4 attacks to Rob 0. Segment 4, Archie 6 attacks, Rob 0. Then finally, segment 5 kicks in. It's a very short one. It's 9 seconds. Archie has 2 attacks, and Rob finally counters and gets an offensive swing in there.
Oh, man.
And so it's really crazy there. So for the first 1 through 6 rounds, Archie leads the attacking rate 24-2. So Rob is he's completely on his heels for that entire match. And I think you also see the mentality of that match shift where Archie knows that he's going to win this fight no matter what, but Rob has got to do something that he normally doesn't do, and he's got to be aggressive in his fights. He can't just sit back and react. So starting at segment 7, which is one of the longest attacks in the entire fight, Archie only has 2 attacks, and Rob suddenly has 9. So he goes on the hardcore offensive in that, and it continues. Round 8, Archie 2, Rob 5. So he's starting to get more offensive with it. Round 10 slows down a little bit. Archie 1, Rob has 2 attacks, but Archie lands his 3rd strike, which is across the right forearm of Rob. And then shortly after that, I think you see again the mind shift that Rob has just got to go all out. Otherwise, he's going to lose. Round 10, Archie 0 attacks, Rob 7.
Wow.
Round 11 is a draw, 1-1. Round 12 is a draw, 1-1 as well, but Archie lands the 4th and biggest strike, which is that deep slash across the stomach that sends Rob to his knees. And so then that's you got kind of a big, long wait period there then where Archie, his hubris takes over and he holds the sword underneath Rob's chin, and then he looks over to the Duke, or not the Duke, looks over to Montrose, should I finish it? Yeah. And it's always that, it's that typical villain of talking too much instead of just getting the job done.
Hey, you just quoted Kate Beckinsale from Van Helsing.
What was that from?
Van Helsing, the final fight.
That's right. Okay, yeah. You talk too much. Guess she didn't sound like Schwarzenegger there, but might as well. But yeah, and so then it ends in the 13th round with Roy's 1 hit to Archie 0, and that's where he cuts him in half. So it's really interesting. I mean, by the time the whole battle ends, Archie has 31 attacks and he lands 4 hits. Roy has 28 attacks and he lands the decisive killing blow.
Wow. I mean, and then neither asked nor given, and then he just grabs a sword. And I like how it was just the breathing during the fight. And then when Rob Roy grabs Archie's sword, the music kicks in.
I was going to mention that too. Yeah, there's no music through that entire fight. So for almost 4.5 minutes of the fight, it's just sword on sword and grunting and heavy breathing.
And you know what I love?
So I mean, what they do with the sound effects and the soundscape of that scene is great.
You know what I definitely like about this is, as you were able to count the strikes, but they did that because they let the camera linger on a lot of these. I mean, the attacks weren't that long, but they really showed wide shots these guys had to learn this swordscraft. And I like that they allowed them to throw 3 or 4 at a time. I think there are sometimes sword fights where slash cut, slash cut, slash cut, slash cut. But this, you almost feel tired at the end of it because you're in it so much. But I also like how the camera goes in, out, wide shot, medium shots. I think that's a really interesting way to handle it. And I also like the production design. I mean, they had to have built that in thinking about duels and camera angles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's such an excellent fight scene.
Well, it's the same exact venue where Archibald takes on Guthrie at the beginning of the movie too.
Poor Guthrie. He was trying to cheat too, Guthrie. He was going to be a backstabber.
He was. It didn't work out. And then he got stabbed in the back. I didn't think about that till now. And then Roy stabs him in the back later.
Roy does fight rather cheaply. I mean, he does not want to die, but he is not above a cheeky stab. Or, you know what I mean? He's not... He has a lot of honor, but he also doesn't want to die.
No.
Right?
And I think it's kind of the aristocrat training. It's almost like I've been watching Band of Brothers the last few days, and so this is kind of a long stretch to tie in, but it's like the West Point